What's up? Long time no hear.
Hey man, doing good. Really pumped for this one. Had a nice break throughout the weekend and Diwali celebrations going on. So really happy for that with the fam, having fun.
Yeah,
Let's
man.
get this going.
Diwali was a blast this time, man. I mean, all our families were just having a
Absolutely.
great time, and I think most of the crypto community was just kind of catching up with this one also. A lot of good wishes across the scene, so that's pretty good. This
Yeah,
being our 20th podcast, wow, in 1.5 months we've come quite a bit. We are looking forward to this particular guest and really excited to have him on board for our 20th episode. He's been someone who's been influential within the DAO space, and we've had the opportunity to interact with him last week, and really excited for the work that he and his community is doing, and the sort of insights that he's spoken about in other podcasts. It's gotten us very keen to kind of explore that on this show. Without any further ado, we have Niran Babalola from who's a community that looks to support any other project that's coming in to be a part of the broader Panvala community and focus on inclusive collective action that takes care of all the projects within it to take it forward to a broader self-organizing future. Hi Niran, how are you doing?
Hello, it's great to be here. I'm doing well.
Fantastic, Niran. It's a pleasure having you here. And let's get this rolling. Niran, your insights has been shared across a lot of podcasts. It's the sort of insights about your project is also really fascinating to see. I think you have kind of made a niche alongside Gitcoin and all of that. But just stepping back a little, what Panwala is about, it's about broader collective action. But what inspired you to take up this cause since what 2018? What's your story that way, and how did this idea of collective action come into your mind and make it a cohesive vision with Panwala?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like I came to Ethereum and smart contracts from a different angle than most people did because I actually did not believe in Ethereum at first. So I came in like I'd heard about Bitcoin, was eventually convinced that this digital gold thing made a little bit of sense. And then when I heard about this group of people that was basically trying to put a programming language into their money, more or less, I was like, that sounds like a scam coin. Like, why do you need a programming language in your money? What's that even useful for? So I ignored it for a little while. But at the time, I was very excited about prediction markets. I'm no longer excited about them. But at the time, I was like this idea that you could let people bet on the outcome of future events and get forecasts for everything. So every news article that you might read would have a forecast of related events. That vision was inspiring to me. So when I came across Augur, a group of people that was building a decentralized prediction market platform, I was like, okay, I want to contribute to this. They happened to be using Ethereum behind the scenes, and it was actually contributing code to that project, the front end code that interacted with their smart contracts. That's what made it click for me, really what it meant to have a programming language in your money. It's not about the money, really. It's about the ability to write down the rules of any interaction, any social or economic interaction between individuals or groups of people. Write down the rules like it's the rules to a board game. If you take those rules that you've written down, rather than needing a game master, so to speak, for whatever interaction you came up with, the Ethereum network is effectively promising to be an impartial game master for any rules that you write down and publish to the network. So if you can come up with any way for people to interact, for people to cooperate, that's better than the disaster that's going on outside in our society. Come up with any better way, you can write down those rules, publish it, and people don't need to depend on anybody to participate in that system from then on. They can just interact with each other, get better outcomes, and move on. So to me, it was like, okay, the light bulb went off. This is a key part of building a better world that works for more people. So that's when I quit my job. That's when I tried to find a place to start working in this industry. But to me, like the context of what Ethereum was not some sort of fancy new technology to put on a resume, was not some way to invest in assets and make a lot of money. From day one, to me, it's like this this seems almost guaranteed to be the seeds of a better world for all of us to live in. How do we get to that? And that's what I haven't been able to stop thinking about since those days in, I guess, 2015. For when I started working at Consensus, which is where I started working in crypto, I worked on more prediction market stuff, did some smart contract auditing, etc. But what I couldn't get out of my head was like, how do we actually build a better world using this technology? So I was also working on these prototypes of what I thought of at the time as decentralized nonprofits, basically trying to take the existing nonprofit model, decentralize it somehow, and move forward there. And Panvala is the third in those series of prototypes where it's less of a decentralized nonprofit and more of a mass movement of communities working together to shift value in our economy. So that's the path that I took to get there. Is really like trying, if you assume that a better world is possible and you assume that you have the tools to build it, I think something like Panvala is what you get when you sit down and try to figure out ways to solve that problem.
That's pretty exciting. That seed has been germinating in your head since 2015. It's quite a long way to come up with this idea. Unlike a lot of people who just came in for the speculation angle, you wanted to do something better with the tech. At that time, very few projects were there, and you decided to come ahead and do Panvala. For listeners who have given them a kind of emotional angle of what Panvala is about, what exactly is the broad description of what Panvala does? And there are a lot of moving angles in there also that we would like to get into briefly. But for listeners who are unaware, what is Panvala all about?
So Panvala is a mass movement of communities and their members to shift the way value flows in our economy away from middlemen and into the budgets of communities across our society. Those middlemen you can think of the advertising middlemen that are basically making money by selling my attention, your attention. They're making a lot of money from that. They're selling us as a product to businesses that want more customers. That does not have to be the way our economy works. And if we can organize ourselves to engage in collective action, we can shift every single marketing dollar in our economy to flow into the budgets of the communities you and I are part of. Those can be communities in Web3, which is where our movement starts, but literally communities in the cities that each and every one of us live in, the real world communities that give our lives more meaning, that we take our families to, our kids, like the communities that are a core part of our lives. We want to dramatically increase the budgets of every single community across our society by shifting value away from middlemen and into the budgets of communities. When our work is done, rather than thinking of corporations as the thing that makes our world go round, or even governments as the thing that makes our world go around, both of those things will still exist, but community life will have taken such a dramatically larger chunk of what we do as a society that when you come across some sort of problem or some sort of need that you have, rather than turning to a government or a corporation to solve it, you'll turn to your community that has the resources to solve that problem for you. That's the world that we're building. And again, that movement starts in Web3 and spreads out into the cities that you and I are in.
So the way I see it, it's like a self-funded ecosystem that you're trying to build with a lot of other players along with the projects that become part of the Panvala ecosystem. How exactly are you guys different from Gitcoin? And you have a lot of moving parts in there. I took a look at the site and you have a Panvala token and you just introduced the Panvala stamps also. How do they interplay for a project who is looking to be a part of this ecosystem?
Yeah, so Gitcoin Grants is great. We've done a lot of work in partnership with Gitcoin. They're basically the torchbearers for public goods funding in the Ethereum ecosystem, and we love working with them. What makes Panvala a unique approach within Web3 is the fact that the money that you earn is literally earned by you and your community. It's not just there, somebody else didn't go get it for you. You literally get it yourselves. So another way to think about it is the work that we do as Panvala, as the team, we are not the source of the value. We do not go get value to give out to you. We teach you how to get value that should already be yours. All those marketing dollars are already yours. They are your endowment. That's the way that we think about them. It's just being misappropriated. So we're just trying to teach every community on the face of the planet how to use this power that they already have, but they just don't know how to use yet. So that's really the key distinction. We are not creating value for you. We are showing you how to capture value that is already yours and drive it to your community. That's what the stamps are all about at the end of the day. Each time you're collecting a stamp, you are shifting where value flows in our economy. Each time you're collecting a stamp, it's the value on that stamp is value that could have been spent on an ad, could have been given to Mark Zuckerberg, could have been given to Google, but instead is going to the community that you choose each and every time. that action repeated over and over by many people across every community on the face of the planet, that is what shifting value in our economy looks like. And again, that's not value that I'm creating for you. It's value that you're going out and getting yourself.
I just have a question here. So just to kind of play the devil's advocate here, let's say if I have my show on, say, Facebook or whatever, but like in exchange for having my show there, I am getting Facebook's bigger user base, and the users themselves are getting it for free, as opposed to them seeing my show for the stamps that they will pay for. It's a bit difficult for the users to make the shift from having a free model to a paid model where your loyalties are there. So how do you convince that shift to happen?
So the way that shift happens is gradually. So again, in the early days of our movement, the forms of advertising that really rely on bringing in attention is not something that we can replace on day one. If you need to teach people to want the product that you offer, then that's not where the movement can start. But what we're trying to build up is basically the power of communities and their members to basically put companies in a position where they have to bid for the customers in that community, where they actually have to offer stamps, which reduces what they have left to pay on advertising. So it's not that advertising will go away. It's not that it literally goes to zero. There does have to be some sort of way to get information out about a product that customers don't know about. The way we see that changing over time is, again, first, it's by less money being spent on that form of advertising. The attention is still there. It's just that the same way that the advertising dollars, the cost per engagement on Facebook fluctuates over time, we expect it to go down because, again, we're organizing communities and their members to make purchasing decisions based on which companies are offering stamps. So instead of spending that money on just ads, you'll have to spend some of it on stamps, and that's the trajectory there. Over time, we expect it to shift even more than that, because if you see communities as basically the ones that should be benefiting from advertising dollars, you can actually think of your community as maybe where you learn about new products that might benefit you. So rather than Facebook trying to put things in front of that it thinks you'll click on, maybe your community leaders are trying to say, hey, we know about you, you're in our community, we think this is actually a product that you'll like, and they're also funding our community. Here's some information. Maybe you get like a pamphlet or a magazine every month from your community with like, here's some products that we think you'll like. Like, we do believe that over time we will we'll shift the culture and the way our communities work to where it's actually the place where you learn about the products you might want to buy. The more that we actually give communities the tool to organize in this way, it's less of a neutral tool that you just start collecting stamps and you get funding. Like, literally, we expect the way this movement emerges to change what communities look and feel like, to expand what communities take on, both in terms of what they need to do to get their community members to collect more stamps. So they expand what they do to make that happen. But once they take in those resources from the stamps and they have dramatically larger budgets than they have today, expanding what they take on in terms of services that they provide their community members, in terms of investments that they make in improving the public realm, instead of just seeing instead of just seeing governments as the solution to problems like that, we want communities to be able to be more ambitious. So we do expect what community life looks and feels like to change dramatically as a result of this movement.
So the way your ecosystem runs depends purely on a massive amount of community involvement. And you remove the way you explain the whole marketing angle. It's what Facebook would have done in terms of discovery and trying to be the middleman for that sort of engagement. You want to be able to get that sort of from the community itself. Now, the question is that in that case, you have this sort of thriving ecosystem where you have two sets of economies. One is the PAN token through which you are able to kind of allow for that sort of funding to the constituents of your economy. And number two, the stamps, which is the broader incentives for which that activities can be. What has been the success stories so far of this movement. Because if you have this sort of economies created, then we should be able to see that sort of deeper involvement from the community. What has been the stories that way from the community?
Yeah, so Panvala's network of communities started with 5 communities. It's now 89 communities and growing every day. Over that time, there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. We may have crossed a million at this point of value that has gone to communities in the network. So literally just enabling communities to do things that they couldn't before by giving them more resources to do more of what they like is the main story of what's happened with Panvala so far. The bootstrapping phase of Panvala has been about basically bringing communities together and showing them how to share this thing and be part of something bigger than themselves. So in the early days, there were no stamps. There was no value coming into the system from an external source. It was purely sharing the inflation from the system. And that's how we grew the network to begin with. Earlier this year, that's when we started the Panvala Stamps program, where value flows in from sponsors and goes out to the communities that are collecting the stamps. And that's really, now that we have this network of communities, being able to mobilize them to actually get value on their own rather than just getting value from the inflation of the system has been where we've arrived at now. So you can think of the token as we want the token to be really the least interesting part of the system, because again, what's actually happening is not a technology enabled thing. It's not a asset enabled thing. It's literally a power that you already have today that we're trying to show you how to use with other people in concert so we can act collectively and shift value in our economy. What the token allows us to do is to bootstrap that movement, to kickstart it more effectively. Because again, without that initial inflation, it would have been hard to build the network to begin with. And then as the movement grows, we want that the token to be able to help us grow the movement. So the way to think about the PAN token is really different than most tokens that are out there. A lot of tokens are designed to benefit the people who buy them. So there's some pitch about how, oh, the fees from the system will go back to the token holders because we'll burn the fees and things like that. And that's really not how Panvala works. Really, we want there to be no extraction from the flow of value that the people in this movement are collecting. We want it to all go to communities. So having some value that's being siphoned off to go to owners of an asset is not compatible with our movement. So we had to design something different. And that something different is that we want it to feel we want it to feel a lot like a shiny rock. So if you think about the stories of how gold itself became something that society saw as valuable, it's a shiny rock that has a useful purpose. There's various uses for the gold, and then it got a social value on top of that. If you think of other rocks that come from the ground, if you think of lithium, imagine you stockpiled a whole bunch of lithium 20 years ago, you'd probably be very rich right now because there's this very important industrial purpose for lithium, making batteries, which we now need a ton of. So again, holding lithium does not give you anything. It's just a rock. If you hold on to it, it does not give you any flow of value. You're not extracting from anybody by holding lithium. But it has this purpose, so other people will buy it from you to use it for building batteries. That's the kind of story that we want for PAN. Holding it does not let you extract any value from the system, but it does have this industrial purpose, so to speak, that we want to organize around, that it's used to mint the stamps that the sponsors in the network want to mint to be able to get customers in the door. So holding PAN does not give you any fees from anybody, but if we are building a future where more and more value is flowing from sponsors directly to communities rather than going to advertising middlemen, then PAN token is that resource that we want the sponsors to be buying to mint the stamps to begin with. So that's how it works. It's limited, the capped supply sort of thing, similar to Bitcoin with the 4-year half-life. With the main distinction is that when sponsors mint the stamps, the PAN token isn't burned, it just goes back into the token supply. So it's like a Bitcoin with a supply curve that could be pushed back by putting Bitcoins back into the system. That's how PAN works. PAN goes back into the system when sponsors mint stamps.
So that's interesting. You have a very circular economy. It's not like Ethereum where you have this burning wala mechanism coming into play. It's just you have the involvement of the sponsors to figure out, okay, where can you kind of find the best involvement of the community for your marketing or for your broader advertising. On the basis of that, you figure out, okay, for this particular campaign, maybe it's better to kind of have this much stamps minted out that way, and your community could be able to get involved with that. And I happen to take a look at some key aspects, like for example, with some of the PAN that was kind of raised, you funded some of Metagama Delta's marketing initiatives, you funded some initiatives for the Federalist book club. Also, that was a book club in a Red Discord that I used to kind of hang out a bit. So yeah, good memories there. Yeah, in all of this, I see a broad aspect of making a circular economy where there's a lot of collective action involved, and you find that a real important concept also, and that's the broad theme to which we want to talk about of how collective action is important for the DAO ecosystem as well, and what are the insights you gain from that. And yeah, we want to get into that for a bit. So the broad aspect of collective action, it's really important for you. And with the advent of DAOs, you start to see this sort of behavior within the community become more rampant. What DAOs kind of enable is that the community itself plays a broad role, right from the inception of the community, right from governance, and right after you of a product, how it's used, the entire life cycle, the community has started to take up that sort of role, because for the first time you have a framework on top of crypto that allows the community to share ownership, to be able to that sort of resources across the globe without any broad jurisdictional, any sort of prevention or that sort of mechanisms coming into play. This has been a kind of a nascent movement that way, and it's unprecedented. Since you've been toying with the idea of collective action and you've been abroad, you've been watching it from the sidelines also in your own way, probably participating in it. How do you think DAOs have played this role with respect to collective action, in your opinion? What exactly is a broad philosophical idea that collective action could be taken? And do you think DAOs are getting there with what you've seen so far?
Yeah, so I think DAOs have not really even scratched the surface of what's possible with collective action. To me, collective action is actually, when we tell the story about what this technology enabled, what ends up being done with it, I do think collective action will be the story, like organizing people to act in concert with one another to give themselves more power. That to me is what this enables. And the key thing there is that what blockchain technology effectively is a legal system without an enforcement mechanism. So that is, you can't just send people, armed people to the door of somebody to enforce the rules of the system. That's not the way it works. It can only enforce what is there socially. So first you have to, for instance, with Ethereum, first you have to believe that Ether is worth money. And then if you break the rules of the Ethereum system, then you lose Ether. But that you don't get fined in the real world if you break the rules of the Ethereum system. So a lot of what people have been building in the DAO ecosystem is things that have that similar internal logic, where they are charging fees that are really only based on effectively the congestion of the system. Ethereum charges fees based on how congested the Ethereum network is. So it's basically limiting access to a scarce resource, and that's where kind of the value in the system comes from. You can think of that as a unique form of collective action. That is, we're trying to build this network that processes transactions together. We're trying to decide who should be able to access this thing that we all share, and then we have these rules for doing it. It's a strange form of collective action. You can also think of things like Uniswap in a similar way, where again, they haven't really turned on fees that go to anybody but the liquidity provider. But if you imagine fees in that sort of system, that's really like they're finding ways to socially collect a fee from the attention that they've built up, from the brand value, et cetera. It's not tied to real property in the sense that most corporations, when you own equity in a corporation, you own a piece of the real assets of a corporation, and then the legal system, the in-person legal system will enforce that. So since we do not have the ability to enforce things in the real world, enforcing things that can be socially enforced is really all this technology can do. And because it's all that it can do, if you believe that it is as revolutionary as I think it is, you should also probably believe that it's for collective action, because the collective action is all, they can't do anything else. So I think that once people start to branch out from purely technological systems, from purely technological decentralization, and start to think of what else they can do, that's really where people start to think of DAOs, where it's, we're not going to do just what this program says that we should all do. We're going to do what these people think we should all do. We're going to vote on how we should reward them, etc. It is the beginnings of something new. But again, with DAOs, most of what people have been building is still things that look a lot like corporations. And again, that's not a knock on DAOs, like building new kinds of corporations. I think it's good and people should keep doing it. What I'm saying is just that there's actually more possibility. That if you say, okay, we're not going to build something that is generating new value. Instead, we're going to build something that reallocates existing value. That is really the key thing that collective action does. It's not about building a productive enterprise. It's about shifting where value already exists. So if you think about the labor movement, for instance, and again, I do not know a lot of labor movement history, and what I do know is limited to the United States. The context there is basically just people trying to shift where value in the economy flows. They're like, the too much value, too much power is going to employers, but if we act collectively, we can change the balance of power. That's really what they were organizing to do. And unions are not productive engines. They don't make a product. They don't provide a service to the public. It's literally just a way to coordinate power and act collectively. That to me is also the killer app of DAOs. It's not that I think there will be all these new forms of collective action that get organized with DAOs. Maybe I am too biased in the direction of what I've created, but I do think the stamp model generalizes to any form of this kind of collective action that you would want to perform. Because at the end of the day, it's about shifting value away from middlemen and into the control of the individuals participating in that act. So the most forms of collective action fall into that pattern. So rather than saying, oh, let's come up with all these different kinds of collective action, it's literally just collect stamps from places where value would have been flowing to middlemen and put that value in your control. It does have to go to a community at the end of the day, because that is the network power that actually makes the collective action work. So if you think of replacing the concept of a union in the labor movement model with just saying your community is your general purpose union, any value that would have gone to a middleman is now going to your community. Just saying that's the shift that's being made here. And now you have a general purpose vehicle for collective action. That is, the communities that you're already part of are that vehicle, and the mechanism is collecting stamps, whether it's from the businesses that you're interacting with. Maybe you find other ways to shift value in our economy, and you create a stamp for that. But stamp collecting is the language that we think generalizes for all forms of collective action that I think DAOs enable. And again, that's really the ability to both representations of that action that are trustless, like being able to create NFTs that prove that you did this action that anybody can verify. That's a cool thing that blockchains do. But really, it's the being able to create tokens is really the killer app that makes collective action grow more than it could grow in the real world. Before blockchains, the people are trying to come up with a new killer app of blockchains. The killer app was created already. It's the token. that's all you really need. And they're really going from there. You can organize all sorts of new cooperation that was very difficult to get done before.
The beauty, as you mentioned, the beauty of the token on top of the crypto framework is that you can now tweak how the crypto flows into the community. Because with the initial set of tokens, there was very limited ways in which you could do it, and there was real modes for centralization here. With the crypto framework, that token flows becomes very important. When you take a look at the broad DAOs itself, that mode of token can be a great incentive to facilitate that sort of collective action in ways which we find a lot of stagnation from the community in. When you talk about having a sustainable treasury within your community, to ensure that entrepreneurial initiatives to facilitate the movement of your community towards a long-term vision, to facilitate that, to ensure that the communities are kind of governed in the proper way. You take a look at the way most societies function, there is a broad apathy towards putting in your vote. But here, because you are incentivized to care for your community, because you get the option to choose your community based on your values. You get the option to participate within the community to the extent that you can. So having that sort of pathways to contribution within your DAO, because it's kind of permissionless in some manner, and seeding that with a reputation system where tokens can flow depending on the sort of work, the sort of value you provide to the system. That, in my mind, allows for a broad collective action that we've not been able to make possible because of a lack of infrastructure and possibly a lot of political friction. But now we're able to see that happen because of DAOs. What start of the DAO idea right till a sustainable ecosystem, you can have the opportunity to have the community play its role in a completely decentralized fashion, and that's pretty exciting for me. But you take a look at the DAOs ecosystem right now, you're right, we have not hit that ideal so far. We've kind of a lot of the problems of what's going on with existing ecosystems within the DAO ecosystem as well. There is voter apathy because don't get paid as much. There is a broad centralization of how much the team gets to decide and control how the treasury flows, how decisions are taken, and there is not a broad participative energy from the community itself. So in a way, DAOs have become like a pseudo enterprise itself. I would rather call them pseudo DAOs, but we don't need to get into that semantics. So the question is, on one hand, there is a need for a broad framework that allows for that sort of collective action to come into place. Where you take a look at what's going on in the US, there are some, I'm not US, probably in Mexico, there are towns where you don't have a police force. It's the locals that take up the entire policing by themselves. When you see that they put the center taking care of their citizens, ensuring for their protection, and seeing that they themselves are capable of taking care of it, they don't feel the need to have a police force in general. They do the protection themselves. That sort of narrative come into play that, okay, I as a society can take care of that. We can do it ourselves. But you look at other societies, it's like we need a police force. We are too powerless. We don't know how to handle the gun. Probably the guy has a bigger knife and I have such weak arms. So you see how narratives kind of shape in here. And I've listened to a lot of your talks also. One of the key tenets for you to have that sort of collective action is necessity of having a strong narrative. Sometimes the token may not come into play. You may not have the treasury. But what is the most critical component is the culture that's woven around that narrative. That narrative takes you through in spite of not having the money. And most DAOs don't have that. Those DAOs are a byproduct of the crypto movement itself. They want to play around with every other project, and if you stick around for a bit, you get your tokens. Does that come from a broad ideological action? No. How do these DAOs build that sort of narratives for their communities? You see so many DAOs coming in for so many different verticals. What has been the common theme of strong narratives that DAOs could implement?
Yeah, so the DAOs right now that are thriving are the ones that have a strong narrative around the enterprise that they have built. The ones that are building a product and a service that people are paying money for, like those are the strong DAOs today. The Uniswaps, the Maker DAOs, the ENS DAOs, things like that. Those are the ones that have a strong narrative because they're like, we're building this thing that people use and that's making money, so let's keep doing that. And every other DAO is struggling. Like, because again, most DAOs are trying to create some sort of enterprise. And I think that is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just extremely risky. It's hard to get strangers on the internet aligned in a direction. Like, it's just a hard problem. And I think when we shift what we're thinking about DAOs doing from creating new enterprises to taking collective action, when we shift what we're thinking of DAOs as from online global communities to in-person communities in the city you live in, then things get a little bit more tangible. Purpose gets clearer. And to me, the people that I think we have the most to learn about how to create thriving communities where people are aligned, where people have a purpose, where people know why they're here, is learning from as many aunties as we possibly can, because they're already doing it everywhere. There's communities that people put together where they raise funds to solve a problem or to throw parties or to keep the community stuck together. And it happens all the time. And people do it with a huge sense of purpose, with a huge sense of accomplishment, because it provides something that their community needs. And I think those ties, trying to form those ties online is possible, but it's just so difficult. And it works so much better in person with people you can meet face to face, with people you can bring your family to hang out with. Like those kind of ties are necessary to do the kind of things that this technology really enables. So to me, the key thing is the more local DAOs, for lack of a better term, that we can create, the better. And the more local communities that we can bring the Web3 energy to, the better, because we'll learn from them, they'll learn from us, and we'll move forward together. There's so many things that existing communities have to teach us. And then the energy that's in Web3 is unmatchable. To me, the killer feature of DAOs is not a voting system, it's not decentralization, it's not smart contracts. It's the fact that people eagerly want to join them. If you start a new organization and you tell somebody, join my new organization, they're like, that sounds boring, I don't want to join that. But if you start a new DAO and you say, join my DAO, or just tell me more about your DAO, I want to learn about your DAO, I want to join. And really, the key thing that we need to shift the world in a better direction is to get lots of people to start and join new organizations. DAOs are the key thing to make that. There's not most of the existing community organizations that you might think of, that you might go visit, are again dominated by older generations because the energy hasn't spilled down to our generation, at least in the US in particular. It's just hard to get people involved in traditional organizations. But if we can take that excitement, that energy from DAOs that young people are eager to join, and to learn how to run communities the way old people are already doing it, that to me is the key thing that gets us back on the right track, where we actually can deliver on this once in a generation opportunity to reshape the world in a way that works better for more people.
Absolutely. Have that energy that stems in from what the community needs. If you are able to articulate that in a way and express that to the community with a clear call to action, the ways DAOs facilitate that sort of ease of access to your discords, to any other forum. There's a very easy way in which you can do it. All you have to do is just ensure that you need to have orient your community around a purpose that matters to the community. And sometimes it's not necessary that that the whole purpose may be something that's socially beneficial. The best example is FWB. Started off as, how do I find a way to token gate my friend circles and have a very good party? But then uh, what happens is that the issue here is, when you do have that sort of DAOs coming into play, sometimes it becomes less about the collective and becomes broadly about the money. And that's where a lot of these narratives fail. Because one is, they lose a narrative in hindsight. And also, secondly, what's very important is, for that narrative to stick, you need to have people who believe in it come front and center at the touch points of whenever the community is very strong, and you have to make that sort of interactions possible. The top 100 people who really care about that sort of narrative need to be out there. The community needs to put them out there to be able to convert, to be able to keep that whole ethos very strong. Best example is, we did an interview with Avigochi, the GMI Guild, which essentially is an independent guild that only cares about evangelizing. They don't do anything technologically different. They don't have the best new smart contracts or a new DAO framework or anything. They do one thing very simple: allow the Avigochi message to spread in a simple way, and allow for that ease of access for even the smallest of noobs without any sort of critique to come in and blend into the Gotchiverse. Very simple concept. But most DAOs don't have that sort of patience. Very important ingredient to build that sort of narrative. So like that, you see how narratives can kind of shape it up, but do DAOs have the right purpose? Do they have the patience? That's yet to see. Having that sort of collective action is more important for DAOs because you're going across jurisdictions, and when you are faced with a lot of possibility of dealing with governments and all of that, ensuring that you're more self-sustained than ever becomes more. And when that happens, having a broad collaborative ecosystem, it's necessary. What I see with a lot of the whole collective action is not just something that's stuck within your own community as well. It's that can you as a community blend well with other communities as well and survive as a symbiotic relationship, caring about what your communities matter, but when the time comes, can your communities stick? Do you see that sort of cooperation from DAOs? Right now, the way we see it, three is united in terms of broad sentiment, but when it comes to serious action, do we see that sort of community, inter-community cooperation, and do you think that is necessary for your own community to thrive internally? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's definitely necessary for, I think, communities to thrive. And I think where it's seen the most is in DAOs that aren't primarily trying to start a business. It's in the meta cartels of the world, the meta gamma deltas, etc. Like they are eagerly trying to help other communities succeed because that's all they're about. They're not trying to the best code that makes the best protocol that can charge the most fees. They're just trying to build a strong community and accomplish the goals that they already share, which is making Web3 succeed. Those are the shining light for the DAO ecosystem. Because again, I believe that when we say it's about community, those are the kind of communities that I really mean. Every Web3 project says it's about community. Most of them are businesses. And again, it's just not the same thing. If people are there to make money, that's not what communities are. I've never been a part of a community in the real world that was primarily about making money. We were primarily about the art that we like to do. We like to get on stage and tell jokes. Communities like that, communities that like to do the same style of dance, communities that practice the same religion, community. There's so many things that tie communities together that are not about money. And right now, I think we're engaged in this large lie about what community means because we've tied it so much to enterprises. We're saying our communities and our enterprises are one and the same, and they are not. And the more that we can draw a line between those two and call them different things, I do think enterprises with a more community oriented ethos are an interesting trend. That is a very important thing that's happening. It's not that people should stop. It's that if we can be more precise about what we're saying, and we could say, okay, community oriented businesses are good, but also real communities are good too. And we need to find a way to serve those real communities and make them have center stage in this movement that is happening here. I think that's when everything gets clearer because you do get more of that cooperation, more of that openness, more of that human feeling from communities that aren't trying to build a business that makes money. Those to me are the shining light of what's going on in Web3 today.
Regarding money, I feel that what you mentioned about the inter-community cooperation and the aspect of money, I disagree with it a little because I feel that money, if it's at the center of it, then you see a lot of division. Okay. But when you have issues that come at the core of a broader communities or the ecosystem, then money will not be that divisive factor. I think there are very enterprising communities that do care only about the money, but when issues come in front of them, they do a very good job of coming together for that. I think the best example is when you have to deal with the legal aspects, when the entire crypto ecosystem has to put that sort of fair regulations. And we've seen a lot of from these DAOs to come together. Best example is Spooky DAO. You have Lexpunk Army coming in with the amicus curiae to help the Yuki DAO. Because if they don't put that brief out there, then whatever ruling comes in, it's going to be bad for the DAO ecosystem. So you need to be able to pool in that sort of resources to be able to ensure a broad, fair legislative ecosystem for DAOs. However, where I feel the whole DAO action is kind of missing and could do with a lot of is the broad aspect of how communities are contributed to. There's not enough data on how contributors are compensated. And when you take a look at DAOs, there is a transparency that comes across the ecosystem. So there are a lot of synergies that come where it makes sense for DAOs to come together as a collective and really put in that sort of standards. Having a proper reputation system in place where the reputation of the whole communities itself, like for example, building a interoperable reputation system, having that sort of fair compensation system in place. These are all synergies that has to be found And that is something that the core team shouldn't be at the helm, but it's the broader communities itself. And that sort of synergies, you need to see a lot of movement there and requires a lot of effort by that way. However, coming into the reputation system and all of that, what I see it's very key here for collective action is that how social capital, you take a look at Gitcoin, you know, the best example is Gitcoin. They are trying to enable that sort of donation. Okay. It's not like you're getting anything properly back, even though there's an angle like, okay, I want that airdrop. But there will be some people who kind of speculate. If I put that money into the donation, I may get some GTC. You never know. But broadly, you see the way Bitcoin has mimified the public goods are good angle. You see how communities across the ecosystem have come in and shaped that aspect of donations when a grant round comes into play. How the broad Bitcoin stewards also really do a good job of sticking to their ecosystem. How do DAOs who want to ensure that sort of collective action build in that sort of community building and reputation? Because the way you see it, there are people who make donations to Bitcoin rounds because it's seen in the broader ecosystem as a great thing to do. You know, how so where what I find missing in broad collective action is that there is a lack of incentive for the individual. But when you weave in that sort of strong reputational incentive, there's a very strong urge for them to participate anyway. So, what are your thoughts on how communities can weave in that sort of reputational framework?
Yeah, so I totally agree that sort of social pressure to give together is part of what makes giving really work. It's part of what makes so many good things happen in our society. And the reputation that you get for giving is a key part of that. And the way that I think about it is less in terms of some sort of reputation system and more in terms of what already exists. Basically, I don't think we need a new reputation system to solve the problem. I think we need to find old ways of how people encourage one another to give. And there are many, many civic associations, civic clubs that are about coming together to give together. So not just about saying, oh, here's some charity, go give to this charity. But there are many clubs where it's like our members come together, we give to our own club, and then we decide what we're going to give to together while we have our regular meetings, while we build tighter social bonds with one another, have parties, whatever it is. But it's the fact that it's something that they do together that makes it keep happening. That to me is a reputation system. Like that, if you're a member of this club, you're only a member because you're giving that requirement. And if you're not giving that requirement, you're not a member. That you know that everyone who's in the room is someone who has that reputation, even though there's nothing on chain, there's no digital system maintaining it. It's just a way of organizing. So we need to do more organizing where reputation is built into how we organize, more organizing where you have to do something to be a member. There's some membership requirement. And right now, so much of the DAO space is not about that. There is no membership requirement. And if there is a membership requirement, it's just that you hold an asset. And the more we can move away from that, where we define membership as something that you've done, you've achieved something, you've contributed something that we all care about doing, that's, I think, a way to make reputation emerge without any technical reputation system at the end of the day.
I think that makes sense. You weave in a broad framework that way, and communities will have to play ball. I want to say that it's been a phenomenal a lot of insights about when you talk about collective action and what DAOs could enable. We see the ideal for what communities could be, but we don't see that sort of action being taken. And the sort of insights that you gained with Panval and how you could see a really self-organized community, it's we want to see that sort of vision play out. Uh, for our listeners out there, what exactly is in store for Panwala ahead of us, and how exactly could our listeners contribute to the Panwala journey?
So the best way to get started on your Panvala journey is to collect your first stamp at panvala.com/stamps. Again, collecting stamps is how we shift value in our economy away from middlemen and into the budgets of communities. And when you collect your first stamp, you'll be able to choose which community you want to support with the stamp you collect. From there, you want to make sure that the communities you're part of that could be benefiting from the stamps you're collecting are part of this program. It's not an exclusive thing. This is a movement for all people in all communities. We want your community to be part of it so you can take the value from the stamps you collect to the communities you care about. You probably want to start with your DAO, the Web3 communities that you're deeply embedded in, and help your DAOs join Panvala so they can collect stamps and earn the funding from those stamps. And as our movement grows, we want to make sure that the communities in person in the cities you live in can also get on board, whether it's the charity that you want to support, or maybe it's an actual community of members coming together around the art that they like, around the religion that they practice, around the sport that they play. Whatever it is that brings them together, we want them to have resources to do more of what they like to do with one another. We want to be able to bring on your real world communities as well. So that's really what Panvala looks like in the near future, rather than just having sponsors mint stamps that are Web3 companies trying to get Web3 people to collect the stamps, making sure that there's sponsors from all sorts of companies where anybody can collect the stamp, because maybe it's from getting stamps from the coffee you buy, or the snack that you like to buy, or maybe like the toilet paper, like whatever you're going to the grocery store for on a regular basis to buy. Maybe you're earning stamps for all those kinds of things that would be in your basket at the end of the day. You're earning stamps that go to your community. That's what we're organizing to make happen. That's what this phase of the movement looks like. When our work is done, literally every interaction you're making in our economy should be an opportunity for you to earn a stamp that you take to your community. When you make choices about which business you're going to interact with, it's about which one is offering the most back to you in stamps that you can take to your community. When you have this resource that you can take with you from community to community, this resource being all the stamps, the flow of stamps that you're collecting every month that you can take to any community you want, that's what gives you the ability to shape our society going forward. It's not about just voting. It's not just about starting businesses. It's about taking your stamps to the community you think is providing the most value for you and the most value for your community, the most value for your society. The community that's making the impact that you want to see, the community that's shaping our world in the way that you think it should be shaped. That's how you can have agency in the world going forward, where it doesn't just seem like the world is happening to you. It feels like the world is something that you have the power to shape. That's the power that we want to give to every single person on the face of the planet, and we want you to be part of it.
Amazing. And I must say, the sort of way you've been advocating for Panvala, this is your baby in a way, even though it's decentralized, it's still conceived by you in a way. You've been doing this for so long. Insights you've had about collective action. A lot of good podcasts. We hope ours is number one, but okay. Where can people follow you for that sort of insights? Where do people follow Panvala?
So on Twitter, I'm Niran, that's Niran, and Panvala is Panvala HQ. That's PANVALA HQ on Twitter. Definitely follow us there. There's also a Panvala newsletter that you can subscribe to at panvala.com. There's a place for you to put in your email address and you can keep up to date.
Amazing. Listeners, do tune in to this one. Follow